My name is Simo Salo, and I look at this first year Finland in NATO as a private citizen, and I think NATO has been very invisible. I haven't seen NATO here. I have heard about those agreements, maybe a dozen agreements have been signed, and some Finnish officers have been sent to Brussels. But what then? Where is the interface to NATO? I think Finnish NATO needs some public relations work to tell people who are the connecting people here, where is the responsibility. If you have to, I would be a businessman that wanted to make some business with NATO. Where are the people I should contact? So more public relations, please.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I'm just going to deepen it a little bit and then turn it over to all the panelists who might want to. So I take this too, that's a really deep question about the relationship between the security organization and civil society in Finland. And from one of the FIIA reports written by Matti Pessu, who had written that maybe probably the Finnish public would never even know that much about what is going on at the deep security levels of NATO and the security posture in Finland, including the nuclear posture. So could maybe Eero, you'd be the first one to speak to that, but what is the relationship between NATO, the security hierarchy that's command and control type of top-down structure, and civil society here in Finland?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and we always think of EU and our experience of becoming EU member, and obviously EU is a lot more transparent organization. I mean, all the documents are public. I used to work at the European Parliament, and all the documents were public. But when you go to NATO, they're probably all classified documents. So there's already this level of secrecy, which kind of limits also the public discussion. Having said that, I think there are also ways to engage the public, and I think media has a really important role to play in this, because if the public is not engaged and if they don't feel that they are interested in these topics, then we lose the touch. And if we lose the touch, in about 20 years, if we make these studies like NATO poll is being conducted now at the Faculty of Social Sciences, we probably see declining numbers. So I think one way is to engage the media and make sure and invite the PR people with the media people to make sure that they will transmit the message. And I think maybe those people that in their daily lives, they come in touch with NATO somehow. If we talk to the people, for instance, in Lapland, in those areas where that big NATO-led exercise is being held currently, I think those people probably would see the visibility of NATO in their lives. But I do recommend everyone who is interested in NATO to go to the NATO website and to get acquainted themselves with the NATO Open Library, because there is a lot of material there as well. So I think it takes a little bit of effort to dig into the deep, NATO content, and there are areas that we cannot fully open up. And I do also, as a fifth point, I would recommend, attending all possible online events that are open from various organizers, not only here in Finland, but in other countries as well, where they have lots of high-profile speakers. For instance, General Cavoli, who is the head of European forces here in SHAPE, I mean, he normally engages in very many events as well, and that he kind of opens up a little bit more how NATO is being commanded and the kind of secret stuff, what you can say on a public level.
It is a huge transformation for Finland to be part of the security organization. I guess that was part of the theme of this panel of the NATO 1 year in. Paul, from the UK perspective, I don't know, I suppose for the Transatlantic Treaty Alliance, it's been pretty invisible until this war. I mean, who was really thinking about NATO? But what's the experience in the UK with the visibility and the transparency and the accountability of NATO versus the civil society in Britain?
Well, I was just thinking in my head, I've been engaging with NATO for 38 years. And when I started, there was an organization called Peace Through NATO. And Peace Through NATO was a civil society organization that was related to NATO. It was essentially a public relations exercise to explain nuclear deterrence policy in the middle of the Cold War. And it would basically be put up against the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and the two would then do a sort of tour of the country, going to public events, and they were very well attended. But the context was very specific. It was in the middle of a Cold War, and we were terrified. I mean, whatever position we were on the opinion spectrum, people wanted to know what the concerns were, what the issues were. And of course, when the Cold War ended, I think the interest left, and it hasn't come back apart from this war. And this war is seen as a confrontation with an expansionist Russian Federation, and then we get all very scared when Putin makes his nuclear threats, and then we forget about those nuclear threats 2 or 3 weeks later, and people are not consistently engaging with the really challenging dimensions of that. And it's already been said quite rightly, NATO is a generally inherently secretive organization when it comes to engaging with the public. And whenever I engage with NATO as a member of the public rather than a member of the elites that have been, I've hosted workshops in NATO, but as a member of the public asking questions, I'm directed very quickly to my own government. And when I ask my own government about NATO, they direct me towards Brussels. It's a round and round circular. So my predecessor, who led the British American Security Information Council, decided to set up a civil society organization called NATO Watch. It has no position on NATO as such, other than accountability and transparency, because NATO declares that it shares the values of liberal democracy, which requires transparency, but it doesn't practice it. And the question, there is an inherent tension, it is inevitable, it's inescapable, between, on the one hand, effective military nuclear alliance, which inevitably holds a great deal of classified information, but at the same time defending the values that requires transparency. And that polarity needs to be handled carefully, but I think by and large, they get it wrong when it comes to engagement with the public, and they could be more transparent. And I think support for NATO, if it were more transparent, if it were more clearly about defending genuine democratic values, which is difficult, don't forget, there are states inside NATO whose democratic credentials are questionable at the very best. And NATO requires a degree of cohesion in public, which papers over the cracks, which are very serious amongst its members. There is a challenge within the NATO bureaucracy about being too honest and open about those differences and about the relationships with the public.
So I'm going to